Hello, you're listening to Mike Madden on the Art Show podcast. Here you will find interviews with authors, musicians, artists and anyone else in and around the arts. Some of the interviews are taken direct from the Art Show on Expat Radio, with one or two specials in between. This show features Scottish author Jane Alexander talking about her latest novel, A User's Guide to Make-Believe. This novel centres around the fascinating subject of virtual reality. Jane also talks about her other works and her journey to becoming a published author. Due to licensing restrictions, we were unable to play some of the songs from the original broadcast. Hello, this is Mike Madden on the Art Show on Expat Radio, and tonight the show's got a very Scottish feel about it, so we're going to kick off with a song, and it's the Proclaimers and 500 Miles.
You're tuned in to Expat Radio.
You've been listening to the Proclaimers and 500 Miles. This is Mike Madden on the Art Show, and tonight I've got a very special guest, just about to release a new book, so welcome to the show, Jane Alexandra.
Hi, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
It's lovely to have you on. Now, your latest book, it's got a wonderful title, A User's Guide to Make-Believe. And I've seen some fantastic straplines around it. It really does sound amazing, a kind of dystopian sci-fi based around virtual reality. So without giving too much away to our listeners, just tell them a little bit about the plot.
Sure. So A User's Guide to Make-Believe is the story of Cassie, who used to work for the developers of Make Believe, which is an immersive virtual reality platform, and who became addicted to Make Believe and the possibility it seemed to hold out for her of reliving a relationship that's hugely significant and precious to her, but that in the real world is irrevocably broken. So when we first encounter Cassie, she's been sacked from her job, she's been barred from Make Believe, she's messed up her family relationships, and she's really lost everything that mattered to her. And then someone appears in her life who seems to promise that she can return to make-believe and that perfect imagined past that she has lost. But of course, things are not so simple.
Things never are. It's a great concept, and there's not many stories I can think of that would equate to anything like this. So where did you get your ideas, and particularly around the VR side of things?
So the idea itself came to me pretty quickly. I mean, certainly in terms of Cassie as a character and her kind of relationship with the virtual reality platform that I'm writing about. I think, though, that it was drawing on some things that I had been thinking about for quite a long time. So I've always been really interested in stories where there's some kind of slippage between what's real and what's in some ways not real. So that might be, stories that blur boundaries between what's real and imagined, or what's real and what's dreamed, or even what's real and what's supernaturally occurring. So anything where those boundaries are kind of messed with, I think I find really exciting as a reader. So as a writer, it was something I wanted to explore as well. And then I also, I think in a way, I'm writing here about the technology that already exists in our everyday lives. So if we think about things like Facebook and Twitter and so on, in a way, those are virtual realities. We're not entirely sure that people are always who they say they are in those environments, and the versions of ourselves that we project in those environments are not always they're not always wholly accurate. So I was kind of thinking about the way that we all use social media, and maybe some of the ways that I found social media to be quite, in some ways, it seemed to promise a kind of a connection, but that connection sometimes was a bit illusory, and you had to kind of disconnect from face-to-face interaction with people in order to have these kinds of connections online. So I think all of those things were kind of playing into to this idea that I came up with about what would happen if we were able to individually imagine our own kinds of virtual realities.
It's a great piece of imagination to come up with this, and I guess one of the things is you need to make it as accurate and as realistic as possible. So did you have to do a lot of research around the virtual reality side to create the book?
I did do some research, yes. So I don't have any kind of a scientific background or a background in technology at all. And I think that in the early stages of writing about science and technology, with every project, that can be actually a bonus, because it allows you to really to run riot with your imagination. It doesn't really matter whether something is possible or not at that very early stage of writing. Later on, though, you have to do your best to make it plausible, to make it seem possible. And so some of the research that I did for this was, just reading a lot about what is currently possible with virtual reality and the different kinds of applications that we're already finding for virtual reality. But some of it was also trying out different kinds of virtual reality as well, which was great fun. So some of the most exciting virtual reality experiences that I tried out were to do with they were artworks. There was one that was a kind of a tour, a walking tour of the city of Edinburgh, which you used a kind of a tablet to augment the reality of the city with imagined elements. There was one that was tremendous, which was, how do I describe it? So it was a series of kind of virtual reality videos of songs by Björk. So you would be standing in a room, but suddenly you would feel like you were on a beach, and Björk was there on the beach with you, kind of singing directly to you and dancing around with you. So some of those experiences were fantastic.
I think you've kind of got to let yourself go in situations like that. I mean, my first experience of virtual reality, I guess, was probably at Disney World with the goggles to do things like Honey, I Blew Up the Kids and that kind of thing. But I've also seen it in action in a scientific environment in Florida, where certain parts of the government were introducing virtual reality to simulate trips to Walmart and things like that for veterans who've got PTSD, who just couldn't relate to going back into Walmart after being on the front lines in Afghanistan and Iraq, etc. So where do you see VR going in terms of that? Because it seems to me that the possibilities with it are absolutely endless.
Yeah, and that example that you've just given about using VR to help people acclimatise to coming back from a conflict zone, it is fascinating to me. And I think that a lot of the kind of potential for VR is in that area. So there's a lot around healthcare, for instance, so particularly perhaps people who have had particularly traumatic experiences in a very controlled and safe way. Virtual reality offers the possibility of kind of exposure therapy, and bit by bit, kind of being exposed to something that you had some kind of very kind of traumatic or threatening experience with, and gradually being able to kind of deal with that. So that, I think that's one of the real areas where there's lots of possibility. I think education as well is something which is really interesting. If there was, so this is something that I touch on briefly in the book, but you can imagine that, say in kind of creative subjects like architecture or choreography, where at the moment you have to assess a student on perhaps drawings that they produce or kind of small pieces of work, but actually you could imagine how in virtual reality, a student might be able to conjure up a ballet that has a huge cast and an enormous kind of a set. Or in architecture, you could have. I mean, we're kind of reaching this point with, I guess, with computer-aided design already. But you could build a really convincing kind of a building that people could walk through and could really kind of assess the success and effectiveness of that as a design project. So there's so much, I think, that is really exciting about virtual reality.
As the father of a tech-savvy 16-year-old, I can totally get that the virtual reality is the way forward for education. He would absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Anything that gets him away from books, really, which is a shame.
Yeah, and I suppose it's really just a step beyond the kind of Minecraft, which a lot of young people at the moment are so kind of absolutely enthralled by. It's that capacity to create something and make something without needing to have a huge amount of resources. So in that sense, I think it could be potentially really democratic as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think as well, he did play Minecraft and he's moved on to things like FIFA now. And with FIFA, the football game, you're not just picking current players, you can pick players from the past to play with players from the present. And it's kind of brings it all together and makes it so much more fun and educational as well. You can imagine, historical settings where you could do that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's opening up all these kind of avenues for really being quite imaginative and creative in how you kind of approach what I guess historically over the last 20 or 30 years or so have been quite linear kind of games where there's been a kind of a narrative or a set of levels that you kind of move through without a huge amount of capacity for you to individually kind of shape that narrative, and we're really moving beyond that now.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a fascinating topic, and we have reached the time for a break, unfortunately. So I'm going to play a track by a guy who's going to be on the show in a couple of weeks. This is Mike Sanchez and Sapphire.
You're listening to Expat Radio, beaming out across France and around the world.
Hello, this is Mike Madden on the Arts Show on Expat Radio, and that was Mike Sanchez with his track Sapphire. Now tonight I'm talking to a fabulous author, Jane Alexander, and her new book, The User's Guide to Make Believe. So welcome back to the show, Jane.
Hi, glad to be back.
Now, as we were speaking before about virtual reality, and people might think that's a heavyweight scientific subject. It's got all kinds of uses, but of course, you said you've not got a scientific or technological background. In fact, you did a PhD in creative writing. Now, we get a lot of authors on the show, and it's always fascinating to know what kind of courses they've been on. And people do go on a lot of courses on creative writing, but we've never had anybody who's actually done a PhD in it. So what sort of pushed you towards that, and what did you get out of it?
Well, so the PhD in creative writing, I suppose, was in a way, it was the kind of the end point of a much longer journey. So I did start off with, doing a kind of an evening class in writing short stories, and I moved on from that and did a master's in creative writing, which is something that is quite a lot of people, a lot of writers now will go that route, although it certainly isn't absolutely necessary to do that in order to become a writer. when I then spent 10 years or so not being a student at all, but something kind of pulled me back into that kind of university environment. And I think what I really was interested in at the point where I started doing my PhD was making a bit of a change in my writing. So I had been writing, I suppose you would call it kind of literary commercial fiction, but very kind of realistic fiction. And then I had started writing some slightly odd short stories where things seemed to, each story in its own way sort of took a little step beyond reality, beyond what's actually possible. And so that was something that I wanted to really kind of pursue, but I felt that I needed some kind of, I guess, support from a supervisor in a university to really kind of help me think deeply about what I was doing with these new stories. So one of the things with a PhD in creative writing is you're not just writing a creative piece, although I did write a collection of short stories, but you're also writing a kind of an academic piece of an academic essay or extended essay, which can be about the writing process, but also about the different kinds of things that you're reading and putting your own writing perhaps into the context of work by other writers, and really exploring a particular research question, just as you would with any other kind of PhD. So it was something that I found really, really demanding. It really stretched my abilities, both in terms of the creative writing and the more kind of academic or scholarly writing. But I feel that it was of a tremendous kind of benefit to my writing as well. It really helped me to change the places where I look for ideas and inspiration, and really kind of, I think, enriched my writing hugely.
And have you ever sort of taken the opportunity to go back in time and sort of maybe revisit some old manuscripts and think, right, okay, I've now got these broader understandings of what I should be writing, and try and improve things?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I think so. I've written a lot of work that hasn't been published. So, for instance, I wrote 2 novels that didn't get published before my debut novel, which came out in 2015. And I've written some short stories as well, which have never seen the light of day. And I always tell myself, these aren't wasted. I can come back to these later on. I can rewrite them if I want to. So, I won't delete them off the hard drive. I'll keep the manuscript and I'll keep the files, and I can go back and I can use bits of these later on in different projects. But actually, I never do. And I think as a writer, I think probably most writers will kind of feel something similar to this. You're constantly developing and moving on, and your interests are shifting all the time. So I might look back at something that I wrote, 10 years ago, and be able to kind of assess it and kind of identify some things that are not bad about it, that could in theory be developed into another kind of another publishable novel. But I just feel that my interests have kind of moved on now, and so that notion of kind of going backwards is not that appealing to me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because I know there's some authors who sort of follow the code that if it takes you so long to write something, so you maybe start something today and finish it in December, you're a very different voice at the start of your writing than you are at the end. So
yeah,
it's kind of don't revisit it.
No, absolutely. I'd have to say, if I were to start something today and finish it in December, I would be dancing around all over the place, because I would think that was such a fast turnaround. But it's something that actually is one of the hardest things to know when you are when you're first starting out as a writer, and perhaps you are writing some things that might never be published. But at what point do you actually make that call? At what point do you decide, actually, this isn't going to be the one? This isn't going to get me a book deal. This isn't going to be the one that's going to be published. At what point do you put it aside? And there are different kinds of approaches to this. So, some people will keep working on the same project and rewrite it time and time and time again. And in the end, they'll end up with something that's great and is absolutely publishable. And it was the right decision for them to keep working on it. But I think that what's tended to happen with me is that I've kind of reached the stage where maybe I've rewritten something a couple of times, but I still feel that it's falling short, and perhaps I'm getting feedback that it's still kind of falling short, and there's a lot of work that would be needed to rewrite it. And at a certain point, I just kind of I cut my losses and move on and start working on something else. But it can be a really tricky thing, because maybe you put months and months into a piece of writing. More often for me, you put years into a piece of writing, and then you have to kind of face the facts that actually this one's not going to make it, and it's time to move on to something else.
No, you touched on your first novel, 2015. It really is 5 years ago, that.
I know, so long.
And that was called The Last Treasure Hunt, and it actually got rave reviews. So was there any particular reason why that your next novel is sort of 5 years later?
I think, so partly it's because I was writing or rewriting a user's guide to make believe at the same time as I was doing this PhD in creative writing, where I was writing something completely different. I was writing this short story collection. So I had these two kind of big creative projects on the go at the same time. So I would move back and forwards between them. And with the novel, I guess because I didn't have somebody who was constantly, asking me for the next chunk of it, and I had an agent who was waiting for it, but waiting very patiently. I wasn't being kind of harassed for it. So it was the short story collection, the PhD, that tended to take precedence, just because I knew somebody was expecting me to send another chunk of writing to them. So it was partly that, but partly also, although I said, that the idea itself came to me very quickly. In fact, I ended up rewriting the whole thing several times. There were various kinds of aspects of the story that I felt they didn't work well enough, or sometimes I was having feedback from my agent or from a fabulous writers group where we swap manuscripts with each other, and sometimes the feedback would be from them that it wasn't quite working in the way that I intended it to. So I think probably 5 rewrites of the whole novel before it actually turned into the novel that finally has seen the light of day. So yes, 5 years is quite a gap between novels. But then there are writers who will take 10 years to write a novel. So I think it just takes you as long as it takes. I tend to be quite a slow writer, unfortunately.
It's each to their own, I suppose. Everybody's got their own styles, but it's really interesting that you mention writers group, because we've had quite a few people on who are sort of avid attendees at writers groups, and we've had others who even though they're about the publishing a novel that is going to be available for the whole world to read, they're very nervous about presenting that in sort of black and white to a writers group for almost personal critique.
Yeah, I think, writing groups, they're not for everybody. And certainly if you don't have a writers group and you're not going along to a writers group, it's not that you're doing it wrong, you're just doing it your way, and that's absolutely valid. I think for me, because my first degree was actually illustration, so I went to art college, and in that environment I was very used to working collaboratively and getting feedback from my peers. So we would have these things called crits, where you would pin up your work on the wall, and then everybody in your class would stand around and tell you what was working about it and what wasn't working about it. So that was a very kind of familiar way of working to me. And so then when I started, I mentioned an evening class that I did in writing short stories, and then the master's course that I did in creative writing, which was at Glasgow University. Some of my kind of peers on those courses did find it intimidating or difficult, both to give feedback to other people and also to receive feedback on their own work. But because of my kind of original training, I guess, it was something that always came pretty naturally to me, and I've just found it to be incredibly helpful. I think one of the things that a really good writers group can do for you is, having just said that I'm a really slow writer, but it can speed things up. So sometimes when you write something, you need to put it away in a drawer for a while and not look at it before you can assess it and really see where it needs further development and where it's already working really well. And with a writers group, the people within your group can kind of help you to do that much more quickly. They can almost kind of they can make it so that you don't need that kind of time and distance between you and the thing that you've written, because they can show it to you through their eyes, if that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. And it's the kind of it's the face-to-face feedback that puts some people off, but which is incredibly valuable as well. And I think with having somebody like yourself at a writers group, it would be amazing, because I also know that you ran creative writing workshops for a variety of audiences. And is that kind of is that ongoing now? The creative writing workshops, is it something you'll always be involved in?
Yeah, I think so. So my job now is I'm a lecturer in creative writing at Edinburgh University. So I'm working mainly with master's creative writing students who come here from all over the world, and so one of the aspects of my job certainly is kind of facilitating the writing workshops for our classes, and also delivering seminars on various different elements of craft for fiction writers, and giving individual feedback on people's work in progress, I think one of the things that I really value about doing this kind of work is that you're constantly reading work by incredibly talented new writers. It really forces you to kind of keep working on your own practice apart from anything else. You have to keep kind of raising your game, because it kind of shows you how many talented writers there are out there. And one of the things actually that I think is certainly I've learned from my own writing journey so far, and also from seeing how my students progress with their own writing journeys, is it's kind of an appreciation that, of course, talent is important, but something else that is equally as important is the ability to persevere. And without that ability to keep at it, and sometimes, to keep writing when it seems like the world doesn't care whether you're writing or not. Keep writing sometimes in the face of rejections, so sometimes you'll send out a piece of work and it won't be the right piece of work for the place that you sent it at that particular time, so they will reject it. And if you can't keep going through those kind of difficult patches, then your talent will never really kind of reach its fruition. So that's one of the things that I really I love about teaching creative writing, is really kind of helping people and supporting people to develop not only their talents but their kind of resilience in what can be a really difficult area to work in. Yeah,
the old standard rejection letters can be quite daunting. Are you ever tempted to sort of say, right, the reading material for today is a user's guide to make-believe?
Do you know, I can't think of anything worse. It would be awful. So, it's fabulous to get feedback from people, but perhaps not in the kind of, not having your students offer you feedback on what they think you could have done better.
Well, we're going to go to another break now. We will be speaking to Jane again after this song, which is the latest single from the band that are from France, but they are known as the London Beatles. This is Salt and Leave Me Then.
Don't need to fight again, there's no room for pain. Well, the truth that we always shared, did it go away? So I need your love, baby, more than ever. It's for the better. So I needed before, I wanted more. Leave me there, and nothing left to say. Leave me there, give us some time and figure it out. Leave me there, and nothing left to say. Leave me there, give us some time and figure it out. written in the stone that this love would fall. So I need your love, baby, more than ever. It's for the better. So I needed before, I wanted more. Leave me there, and nothing left to say. Leave me then. Give us some time and let's figure it out. Leave me then, and nothing left to say. Leave me then. Give us some time and let's figure it out. And I'm gonna leave this town for a while. Leave this town for a while. Gonna leave this town for a while. Why don't you give me more? Leave me then, and nothing left to say. Leave me then, oh, so give me some time to figure it out. Leave me then, and nothing left to say. Leave me then, oh yeah, give me some time and let's figure it out. Oh, leave me then, come on and stay there. Leave me then, till I'm a baby girl. Woo! Turn right up, come on. Woo! Why don't you leave me then?
Hello, this is Mike Madden on the Art Show on Expat Radio. You've just been listening to Salt and their latest single, Leave Me Then. Don't forget to check out our Facebook page and also to find us on Twitter and tell us exactly where you're listening in from. Now, today we are talking to Jane Alexander and her book, A User's Guide to Make-Believe, published on, I believe, the 23rd of January. So welcome back, Jane.
Hi, good to be back again.
Now, we've touched on quite a few aspects of your writing and your career, but where did it all start? What's been your route into publishing?
So when I was very, very much younger, when I was a child, I loved to write stories, and I also really loved to draw pictures. And those two things kind of continued in parallel all the way through my kind of childhood and my teenage years. And then I made the decision to go to art college instead of going to university, perhaps to do a degree in English literature. And I think that was because, really, art college seemed to offer a more kind of straightforwardly creative route into a kind of a career. Whereas with English literature, I think I kind of perhaps looked at that and saw that it would maybe lead to a more kind of academic career, which was at that point wasn't something that I was particularly interested in. But once I finished art college, I worked for a bit as an illustrator, but found it quite hard to get work. And then I went travelling overseas and couldn't really carry art materials in my backpack, but I could carry a notebook and a pencil. So I started kind of capturing my my kind of experiences of travelling in prose rather than visually. And I think it really all stemmed from there. So, when I came back to the UK, I kept writing and went to a short story writing class and really enjoyed what we did there, and began to think I would like to make some more space in my life for writing and make writing a part of my life. And I think at that point I had the idea that so far I had been writing for myself, but I would like to start writing for other people to read what I was doing. And so from there, it was a fairly, in some ways, straightforward kind of path. I was always writing from that point on, but a long kind of a path as well. So I've mentioned the fact that I tend to be quite a slow writer. So each novel that I wrote would take me a long time to write, and then it took me a couple of novels before I really kind of found my feet as a writer and started to write stories that actually were things that other people would want to read.
I think if you looked at your user's guide to make believe, it is kind of a different take on virtual reality, and you've also written a short story called Candlemaker Row that was published in Umbrellas of Edinburgh, and which you won an award for, I believe. So, what is it that makes that different and gives you the different perspective?
So, Candlemaker Row, I think is probably the story that I've had most kind of. It's been published a few times in different places actually, and I've had a lot of kind of positive responses to it. Actually, that story was one that I wrote for. It was a competition where the invitation for submissions was to write anything about Edinburgh, which is the city where I live, and for weeks I was kind of wandering around thinking, what can I write about this? Edinburgh has been so much written about, it felt very hard to kind of almost clear any imaginative space for me to write something fresh about this city, and then I just had this incredibly bold idea, or so it felt, that I was just going to destroy the city of Edinburgh in some kind of unspecified disaster, and then virtually reconstruct it. So the story became the story of a technologist of smells who's working on reconstructing the particular smells of Edinburgh, whilst all her colleagues are working on reconstructing various other kind of aspects of Edinburgh, the way that it looks and the kind of the architecture and the topography of it. So I think with those two very different kinds of pieces about virtual reality, in a way, what I'm writing about there is the process of writing itself. So with both of those stories, A User's Guide to Make Believe and Candlemaker Row, I'm thinking very much about how we construct realities. And of course, as a writer of fiction, that's what I'm doing all the time. I'm trying to choose the right details, and I'm trying to make them really convincing. And I'm perhaps using all different kinds of sensory detail, and using not only sight, but sound and touch and taste and smell as well, to really make something believable for my readers. So I think in a way, that's something that keeps bringing me back to that particular topic and that particular subject of virtual reality.
I think it's a brilliant approach, and clearly it was well appreciated. As I say, award-winning short story writer now it's a great sort of thing to be able to say to people and put on your CV. And you've got a literary agent as well, Lutyens and Rubinstein. How did they come across you?
So this is a heartening story for anyone who is writing and who is submitting work to literary agents. So because I'd done this master's in creative writing, so we'd been introduced to some agents on that course, and I had some friends of mine from that course who'd gone on to get published. So when I started looking for an agent, I used all of those connections that I could, but I had no luck. Nobody was signing me up. And so I went to the library and I borrowed the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which has a list of all the literary agents and all the publishers as well in the UK. And I looked through the list and noted down anyone who sounded as though they might be interested in the kind of work that I was writing. And I just started sending out submissions to them. So normally you're sending a kind of a covering email and perhaps the first 3 chapters of your novel and a little kind of synopsis of the novel as well. And my submission at Lutyens and Rubinstein was picked off the slush pile. So I had no contacts there. It was just somebody who was, I think, an intern at the time who was reading through these random submissions that had come from people all over the place, and my novel particularly caught her attention, and so it really went from there. So they requested to see the whole manuscript, and they liked what they had read, and I went down to London to meet with them. And the literary agency at Lutyens and Rubinstein it's in the basement of a bookshop behind a hidden kind of a swinging wall of books. So as soon as I went to visit them, I knew that I had to sign up with them, because how could you not?
It's a story in itself, isn't it?
It is. But I think I see that as a really kind of positive kind of story of how you can. It doesn't necessarily matter if you don't have connections in the literary world. It's not always the case that talent will rise to the top, but the chances are there, and if you keep at it, and if your manuscript gets onto the desk of the right person at the right time, and they fall in love with it, then they will take you on. They're always looking for new talent.
Yeah, and it's don't fear the dreaded slush pile, because there's always a chance.
Absolutely, and keep going through rejections. So I had many rejections from literary agents before I found my happy home at Lutyens and Rubinstein. So.
Back to A User's Guide to Make-Believe, and it's been chosen by the Scotsman as one of their cultural highlights of the year ahead, which is a fantastic achievement. So how did they come to do that?
So this is very exciting. Yeah, so one to watch for 2020, so this is really all the good work, I think, of the publicist who's working with me to help kind of bring the book to the attention of people who might be interested in reading it. I think one of the things about the book is that it's quite topical, so there is this kind of concern at the moment about how we're using technology, how technology is using us, the various different kind of ways that it makes us feel uneasy sometimes. So I think that the book taps into that really kind of timely discussion. And although, I don't think that the book is a straightforward dystopia, because I hope that it has a kind of a slightly more nuanced portrayal of technology than a straightforward, kind of technology is evil kind of a scenario. But I think it certainly does tap in as well to that kind of trend at the moment for dystopian literature. So I think those things probably help to sort of tick the boxes for the Scotsman.
Now the hardback is released on the 23rd of January with the ebook as well. So what have you got planned for the launch?
So we're having the launch at Waterstones, West End in Edinburgh, and it will be a brief reading from the book, and then I have a fabulous chair, Vicky Adams, who is going to grill me on the process of writing the book, and there will be an opportunity for questions and answers and discussion with the audience, and then there will be a book signing, I think, and then it will be all back to a nearby pub for some refreshment and some further discussion and chat.
Sounds absolutely wonderful. And of course, the paperback's out in June, so you could do it all again then.
Yes, absolutely. That's the best thing about having a hardback and then a paperback. 2 launches.
Now, it's also, I'm a big fan of audiobooks, and it's also out on audio and CD. And I would call that the cost of The User's Guide to Make-Believe reassuringly expensive. You don't want something that's sort of $1.99. Well, some people might, but a new book coming out, you don't want a cheap and cheerful. You want to know that you're paying for quality. So, did you get involved in the creation of the audiobook?
So I was sent a kind of an audio clip of the narrator to check out whether I felt that she had the right kind of voice for narrating this story, Cassie's story. And I was really delighted with the choice of narrator. So Kristen Atherton, who has narrated one of the books that I really love by an author called Scarlett Thomas, called The End of Mr. Y. So because she had that kind of track record, and she also has just a great kind of reading voice, I was absolutely delighted with that choice.
It's one that I think many people will be looking forward to. So we're kind of running out of time now. So it's been a fascinating conversation. But in the minute or so we've got left, just let our listeners know where they can find out a little bit more about yourself and your writing.
Yeah, so I have a website which is janealexander.net. And I'm also on Twitter at Dr. Jane Alexander. And you can also find out a bit about me on the Alison and Busby website. So they're the publishers of A User's Guide to Make Believe. So there are various different ways that you can find out more about me.
And I actually found out that your hometown is Aberdeen.
That's right, yes. Yes, I grew up in Aberdeen, and I'm very lucky to have been invited back up there in May for there's a literary festival that happens up there every May. So it will be my first kind of invited appearance back in my hometown, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Wonderful. Well, we'll watch your career with interest. And for your next launch, please get back in touch and we'll certainly have you back on the show. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
We're going to now play out with another of our regular guests. This is Razzmatazz and Moving On.
Expat Digital Radio, online 24/7.
Hello, this is Mike Madden on The Art Show on Expat Radio, and that was Razzmatazz with their song Moving On from the album of the same name. Now, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have Caroline England back on the show. So, to get you in the mood, here is Caroline's short story, A Day of Nothing, from the collection Watching Horsepats Feed the Roses. So sit back and enjoy Ollie reading A Day of Nothing.
A Day of Nothing. Waking to black and white yet again. He wrenches his mind into focus. Bank holiday Monday. A day of nothing. Closes his ears to the thrum of traffic and the cheerful bloody birds. For seconds, the ringtone confuses him. He changed at the same time he deleted her number. He'd like to switch it off forever. Execute an act of absolute finality to the fucking thing, but he needs it for work. And his parents. He knows that it's her. She never uses his landline. Likes an instant response, and he always obliges. "I think I'm in love, Jamie," she immediately says. "Are you around this morning?" Closing his eyes, the sparks of colour fly. Where the hell does the tatter of hope come from? She slumps opposite him on the sofa, threads her naked legs through his, and though he tries, he can't block the smell of her lemon shampoo nor the balm of her soft flesh against his. Closing his eyes, he lets her talk. "Jamie, did you hear what I said?" she asks. Oh yes, he's listening. He likes the sound of her voice. Lets it wash over him without taking in a word. "Well, what do you think?" She's peering at him. Her face bare of makeup. She has dark hollows beneath her eyes and her chin is blemished with spots. "I think you should get more sleep," he replies. He watches her lips shape the words from his bedroom. "Open a window, Jamie," she's saying. "Let in some fresh air." Same as always. A glance up before she climbs in the car. A smile, a small wave. Her parting gift. Remember me, think of me, want me. The window stays shut. Looking down at his t-shirt, he studies the orange stain. An amoeba of grease surrounds it. Last night's chicken tikka masala. For now his heart is in spasm. He's glad he was dirty and smelly. He's bloody elated he wasn't a sap. Clenching his fist, he punches the air and heads for the shower. The sun's shining. It's bloody shining outside. He pelts for the 142 bus, but doesn't give a toss when the smirking driver slows down, yet doesn't halt. Keeps on walking down Wilmslow Road. Stop to stop. His shirt stuck to his back. Finally, he's so close to town that the fare's not worth it. Focuses his eyes. Gemini Cafe's changed hands. Townley Building's been demolished. Another Tesco Metro, right next to an Aldi. A cycle shop warehouse in Rusholme. An empty Lloyd's TSB. All the things he'd looked at last week but didn't see. Closing his eyes, he smiles. He hasn't looked at his mobile for hours. "Can I help you with a size?" the woman asks. She's pretty. Even takes the clothes to the cubicle and hangs them with a smile. "Call if there's anything else you need." He pulls on the jeans and stares at the mirror. A man he loathes gapes right back. Disgust blocks his throat. He can't breathe, he can't swallow. Tight bloody jeans. And Selfridges too. He hates fitted fucking jeans, but he's trying them on. Just for her. The smack brings him back. A willful thwack against the image. "Everything okay?" he hears beyond the door. Lifting his eyes to mirror, he breathes. Save for a red smear on the glass, life's back to grey. "Couldn't be better," he replies. The 142 trundles home. His head painfully throbs. He's tired. Weary of life being on repeat. Fed up of being so bloody predictable. Closing his eyes, he pictures torment captured in monochrome anyway. It always kicks in sooner or later. Slide by slide, legs thrown over his on the sofa, tiptoe kisses at the door, white even teeth, hair twisted in slim fingers, occasional tears, his hand vibrating with the judder of the bus. He stares at his mobile. A smug icon of an envelope winks, but it isn't from her. She's told him her latest news. His usefulness for now has expired. The text is from his mother. A skill acquired from months of waiting at Christie's. Message after message, mother to son, until the medics gave up. "Don't forget dinner.
Dad's next in line. Can you believe we're still waiting? Sure someone's jumped the queue. Alice is here. Wish we'd gone private. The consultant seems nice. Are you all right, James? Haven't seen you in ages. Dad says hello.
Sun becomes rain without warning, flattening his hair, dripping from his nose. His shirt plasters to his chest and his teeth chatter, but he doesn't feel it. His mind is in overdrive, keeping him warm. Why didn't he listen this morning? The who, what, when, especially the who. Who has she fallen in love with this time? Angus, she said. Who the hell is Angus? And then, what's the point? Nothing he can do. Emasculated. Powerless. The need to puke stops him short. Leaning against a wall, he heaves out the bile on some poor bastard's steps to his cellar. Stripes of colour explode at the back of his eyes, and with it comes clarity. A way to stop the endless bloody cycle of conflict. The wanting, the need, the lust. Corrosive lust. As simple as that. He can do it. He really can. His mother's at the sink. She doesn't turn around and he's glad. Anything to postpone her painted, cheerful face a little while longer.
Dinner's on the table in 5 minutes, she says to the soap bubbles. Why do you always leave it so late, James? Better say hello to Dad first. Be careful those stairs. Alice is already up there. In the attic room, his dad has shrunk again. Another tiny pucker into yellowing flesh. He hates him for dying, for losing his strength. He loathes the wasting stranger left behind. How's it going, Dad? He asks.
Better for seeing you, son.
He puts out a hand, his fleshless grasp strong.
Son?
Closing his eyes, James sees nothing but black, wishes he could pull away from the steady grip, the stifling room, his sickly house, and he knows it's coming. He wants to cover his ears and bolt, but his dad's wheeze is laboured, much worse than before.
James, son, promise me you'll look after your mother and your sister when I'm gone.
There's movement behind him. A gentle hand on his back.
More like me looking after Jamie, Dad. And don't worry, I will.
Stripping back his eyelids, he turns to his sister.
What have you done to your face?
She asks. Her forehead creased. Alice gazes, then explores the cut with soft fingers.
What's going on, Jamie? How did you do it? It wasn't there this morning.
His knuckles bone white on the banister. He waits for his sister at the top of the stairs. The batter of his heart burns his ears. The resolve is still there. He can do it. He can. He pulls back against the wallpaper to let her go first. But she stops on the landing, wraps her arms around his waist and leans her head against his chest. A moment on hold. Sweating profusely, he inhales the sweet smell of lemons. Her breath strokes his cheek.
I will look after you, Jamie. I promise,
she whispers. A rainbow of fantasies shoots through his veins. He had a plan. He knows he had a plan, but he's lost it for now. Pulling away, she takes his hand.
Come on, little brother. Dinner's waiting. Did I tell you this morning that Angus wears these really tight designer jeans?
And she smiles her smile with white, even teeth.
You've been listening to the Arts Show podcast with Mike Madden. Come back soon for more artists, authors, musicians and anyone else connected with the arts. We're going to play out with Mike Sanchez and I Don't Stand a Chance.
Baby, you hiding something that you don't want me to know, because I'm getting a vibe from way down the side, like you're just about ready to go. And you can't tell me where you stayed last night. You just can't cope with treating me right. I'm on the road to heartbreak. Now's the time to tell me so, because I'm getting a chill like I'm gonna be ill. I know you don't want me no more. I won't be satisfied with your little white lies. Girl, I've only just begun to realize I don't stand a chance. I don't stand a chance. You don't wanna know when I can't make you dance. Well, I said goodbye. Find yourself another guy. I wish you were mine, but I'm losing my mind. I don't stand a chance. On the road to heartbreak, now's the time to tell me so. Because I'm getting a chill, like I'm gonna be here. I know you don't want me no more. I won't be satisfied with your little white lies. Girl, I've only just begun to realize I don't stand a chance. No, I don't stand a chance. You don't wanna know when I can't make you dance. Well, I'll say goodbye. Find yourself another guy. I wish you were mine, but I'm losing my mind. I don't stand a chance. I don't stand a chance.